Excellent. Okay, let me open this up to the panel here. So, Ed, did you have any? I know you were excited about this a couple shows back. Did you have any comments or anything? Or
I do have a comment. Last time, or maybe on a prior show, I mentioned that the thing, I mean, I think the whole thing's brilliant, but the one thing that I thought was really brilliant, which tripped up a lot of people when they were trying to figure this out on their own, is the dynamic mask.
Mhm.
So what you do in there is you generate a mask when you first create the ring,
Mhm.
and then you can reuse that over and over, and that way you get exactly the right sized mask, and you don't have to have it present. And what I said on the previous show is one could take the technique that you've presented and expand upon it to create a mask with a variable shape.
Can I show you what that looks like? Am I getting too far away? I'm working on modularizing it, and it's very nearly ready to go. But I've got a working code of what I call AutoMask, and I can show that to you. Maybe we should wait until
Yeah, I don't want to let your cat out of the bag.
No, it's fine. I really wanted to have, my plan was to sort of have a blog post ready to go and say, and it's up on my site. It's not quite up on my site, and I think that's worth talking about, actually. Some of the headaches I've had with this, particularly with creating dynamic masks, which I do for this, and this was the bug that I mentioned earlier that somebody found on the forums. If you were using a config.lu and you specified your stage size. So the problem with this is it's very easy if you say this is an iPad-only app. It needs to be 1024 by 768. But the way that I create a mask, and it was very easy with this because it's just a circle or a series of circles. But even with my other module that I'm working on, the way it works is, so I take an image or a group or what have you. In this, I created an image by using a black square and a white circle, and I create that in a display group. And then I capture that display group to flatten it and save it as an image. And then what I do, or actually in this case, it's a white square and a black circle, because then what I do is, all right, I think in this case I didn't flip it. I captured it as a white circle and a black square. But when I'm doing it with dynamic, with any image at all, what you can do is capture that image, take the image itself, so the part that you want to be hit testable, the part that you want to come through. I don't know if that's the part that's masked or the part that's not masked is the correct parlance on that. But you can take that, you make it black, you make it completely black, so you call set fill color to 0. And then you put a filter effect on it, and you invert it. So then what you've got is white, which is the section that needs to be visible, and you place a black square behind that. Then you'd use a display save call to save that to an image file, and then you reload that image file as a mask. And it really is pretty simple. It's not what I dislike about it. I do have to throw a timer delay in it. I use 1 millisecond. I know it probably takes, technically speaking, a little more than that. But because you're saving that file, you can't in the same cycle, save that and then load it as a mask. You're going to throw up an error. But the problem with that is, if you're creating an app that's going to be viewed on multiple screen resolutions, which I think most of us do, whether it's a universal iOS app or whether it's any kind of Android app, and who knows what size you're using, Corona's great. It does, you can use letterboxing, you can use zooming. The problem is the display.save API is not going to save that in terms of the display coordinates you're using. It's going to save it to the device's native resolution. The problem with that is the requirements for a working mask image are very strict. So you need to have at least padding of 3 pixels on all sides. That part's easy. The tricky part is the width and height of that image have to be divisible by 4. So like I said, going back to earlier, if you know it's going to be on an iPad and you know it's 1024 by 768, it becomes very easy to say, great, let's make sure that this square that is the background of my mask image, both are divisible by 4, no problem. If you're taking that same app and now running it on an iPhone 6 or an iPhone 5, where the native screen resolution is different, you might end up with a image file whose coordinates are not divisible by 4. And that is sort of the sticking point that I'm working on with my AutoMask file. And it's something I've discovered is a bug in my progress ring, which it's not always going to present itself. I don't think it's showstopper yet. If you're testing it, you can work through it. But my goal is to get it to the point where it just works all the time in every case. So there's going to be an update in the next, if I'm on my game, week. If I'm not, a couple of weeks.
This is one of those annoying things where it works sometimes and doesn't work sometimes, and you're like,
just to give you a glimpse of how it looks here. So if I think my progress, this demo, you can see here. This is what happens when you get a mask file that's not. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be saying, look, here's the bug in my code. But yeah, I agree with you going back several minutes now that the progress ring itself is not necessarily what I think is the coolest feature of this particular module. I think there's a couple of things. I think one thing too that's buried in me creating the mask that I think is kind of cool. If you ever need to, so when to use the display capture API, or is it display save? One of the two, possibly both. What you're capturing has to be completely on the screen and completely within the bounds of the screen, and it can't be invisible. It can't have it can't be flagged is visible equals false. So one thing I do when I'm creating the mask here is you'll see I'm going to highlight it here. I say local CoverUp. So I create what's called I call it CoverUp, and it's just a display new rect, and it matches the default background color. And then what I do is on the stage, which is the most root base sort of visual layer within your app, at the very bottom of that I insert that CoverUp. So that's essentially mimicking what the background color of your app is and throwing a rect there, so that you can, anything that you want to do now, you can put it behind there. It's on the screen, it's within the bounds, it is visible, but it's not visible because you've hidden it. And I think that's actually something that has potentially lots of uses. So you can see here, this is where I sort of insert it on the stage. And when I'm creating a mask group here, I do the same thing here. I place it just below that CoverUp rectangle. Which I think is something that's sort of buried in here that has potentially lots of applications.
Now, not to give you more work, but I noticed one thing about your code that I was wondering if you'd considered. So you're doing this over and over, making changes, and so it makes perfect sense to save it into the temporary directory. But it occurs to me that you might want to have like a setting for like a non-debug setting or something that says instead of saving it to the temporary directory, save it to the documents directory, and then check to see if it exists beforehand.
Okay.
So you don't even need to generate it.
Oh, yeah, that's actually.
Because then you could have like a generation phase in your game where you're generating up the things among which would be this, and then afterwards it would always be.
Yeah, I think that could work actually. I think too what I could do is name the file the radius, or the radius, some combination that indicates what the radius and the depth is, because that's going to be the differentiator. Is the mask itself is going to change slightly depending on the depth that you specify. So that, but yeah, I think that's actually if I'm updating it, that's sort of a cool idea.
I got a question for you. This is a question. I hate asking questions where I could have checked it myself, but
that's okay.
Have you run 2 of these simultaneously?
Yeah, I have. Not. Let me. Let me whip up. If you don't give me 2 seconds, I'm going to make a quick.
I always say that, but it takes like at least 15 seconds. Especially if people talk while you're trying to type. So I'll do that part, okay?
Sure.
So Stephen, did you have any thoughts on any of this?
Not so far.
Not so far?
No.
They were talking a moment ago about being able to generate and then save, and I thought immediately about your coroutine talk about doing different batching different actions and being able to jump between them. What kind of cat is that?
It's a cat that doesn't like being on the show.
Holy cow, man!
She doesn't like when I talk or when she hears talking. So.
She doesn't like that.
It's so funny. I'm sorry. It's just making me laugh.
No, it's okay.
You have the bird too?
No, the bird is outside.
Oh, I was saying, it's like a menagerie here.
There's just no sound muffling
So
of
funny.
any sort.
Like a Looney Tunes cartoon. I saw a footage that.
They all want to be on the show.
Yeah. Well, the Lua programming in Lua book actually has an example where he downloads several files. Roberto does using coroutines concurrently. So in that sense, I guess it would be the same sort of thing.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that would apply, that you could kind of swap back and forth between operations and maybe be able to.
If you were building up a huge file, then it would make sense. Like I'm also doing something with masks where I'm making several frames, and then if those took a long time, I could conceivably split them up across a coroutine.
Okay. Well, for everybody who's listening, Steven's written a blog post about coroutines that hasn't been published yet, but it's in the queue to be published, and it's an in-depth breakdown of what coroutines are and how they are used and how you can pass data between them, and it's going to be good. So look forward to that coming soon. It's going to be an awesome one. So what do we got, Jason?
So I've got these 2 rings set up now. You see, let me see here.
Okay, they're both operating at different speeds.
Yep, I set the one to go. Although one is my radius. Helps if you spell radius correctly.
You could do a ring races game.
So now you've got 2. So the one is got a larger radius, is progressing all the way to 100% in the span of 10 seconds. The other one's taking 12 seconds to go to the 0.5 mark, to halfway. So yeah, so you could do this. You could have a whole bunch of them, and in my testing, it seems to run pretty well. Let me go back to sort of how it's constructed. I realize I sort of glossed over. Is that so? I've got what I have are. Let's see here. How many did I make? I want to say I made. I can't remember whether it was 36. I think it might be 36 slices or possibly 18 slices. So what I do is create a series of triangles, all with their rotational point right at the center there. And they sort of, if you think of it, they sort of slide one after the other, boom, 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 until you get the whole thing. And that was me. You could do that. You could create 360 of them. And for me, I think it was just about trying to arrive at a middle ground that sort of made sense. I wanted to keep it as low overhead as I can. I don't want to keep track of, ultimately the progress ring that's generated is just a display group, and it has some methods that manipulate its children objects, and to me it seemed like, okay, well, and I can't remember for the life of me now how many slices I created. Let me see here. And it was just sort of decide. If anybody has any thoughts in terms of, that's too many. I mean, because ultimately, yeah, if you're going to have 20 of these things on the screen, suddenly you multiply that number, by the children objects in it. You are potentially rendering a whole lot of display objects at a given time, and Corona is pretty good at managing that and allowing you to have a whole lot going on at any given time, but you don't want to tax things needlessly. Let's see here. Yeah. So there were 10-degree slices. Here's where it is. So this is just sort of a for loop.
So am I understanding this correctly, that if you wanted to go in bigger chunks of time, like you wanted the progress ring to kind of jump a little bit, you could do that?
I don't know that it would result in jumping, because I'm using, a pretty smooth transition, so everything's just, I could have done this with, I suppose I could have used just even as low as 4 I could have made them a quarter of the size and rotated them that way. I just, it could have even used just rectangles, I suppose, but it just seemed, and there's also some masking going on here. So when they're hidden, when when the progress ring is at 0, I originally was using just a check. So it would say, if it's at 0, everything's rotation value, all of those triangle slices are negative, whatever the rotation is, so that it would be to the left of sort of the vertical line. And
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Mr. Impatient, please go on.
Okay, so originally I used no masking at all, and so what I would do is, as it was progressing, once the rotation point was greater than, say, 0, make it visible, so that and that worked for the later part of it, but you would end up having this sort of wiggly line up around the top as things are snapping into view, and I experimented with a few different ways to beat that. Some of which was, maybe, so whereas the final one has slices that are all 10 degrees, maybe I did 10 1-degree slices and then, 35 10-degree slices to get the full 360. And everything I did just sort of, it just wasn't quite there. Up around that top line, you just get a little bit of wiggling, and just drove me crazy. So finally I said, oh, well, okay. I'll use masking to hide those things when they're to the left of that. And
I tell you, this sounds a little bit about like painting a room. I pay other people to paint rooms because if I do it myself, it'll take me twice as long, and I'll see all the mistakes.
Yeah, I felt a little bit like that. But this is one of those things too where there's a reason I sort of just share this with the community. I'd love, if anybody sees room for improvement, I'd love to hear it, because this thing can live beyond me, that's for sure, and it's not perfect by any stretch, as we saw when I put it on an iPhone 6 skin. But that part's going to be fixed.
Yeah, that's just a matter of time. That's just a problem that needs to be solved, and there's an answer out there somewhere. So.